Hello all, and welcome back to a new episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to be reviewing the film The Holiday, and this is going up on Christmas, so we had to bring a little special present for y'all, and our present to you is Michael. Michael is back on the pod, y'all. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Michael Burgett. I am the host of the Screen Nerds podcast, a podcast for film lovers, by film lovers. And this is my gift, is to be able to be with you, Jen and Sarah, to discuss one of my favorite films, The Holiday.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, you've heard Michael on the pod lots in the past. I think we've got Bike Riders, The Perfect Day. There's been a ton of there. I can't even remember them all. Okay, well, we are getting real festive today, and we are going to dive in and talk about The Holiday. What a perfect episode to come out on Christmas Day. So, Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for The Holiday?
Sure. Amanda lives in LA and is a movie trailer editor. Iris lives in Surrey and is a journalist. The two decide to swap houses for 2 weeks at Christmas, both trying to forget their troubled love lives until love finds them anyways.
You can run, but you can't hide from love, apparently.
It's going to track you down.
Yep. Okay, in Movies and Us tradition, we like to start off with our one-sentence summaries for the film. And Michael, as our guest, I'm curious to hear your one-sentence summary.
My one-sentence summary is, sometimes you have to travel halfway around the world to find the gumption you need.
Yes. When in that scene, I'm like, what is going to come out of her mouth? And gumption was not on my bingo card. That was not going to be my guess, but seems fitting for a Brit. Sarah, what is your one-sentence summary for The Holiday?
All they want for Christmas is tears and a new boo.
And they get both of those. Yes, both of them. Okay, my one-sentence summary is, for a classic and timeless love story about a love that challenges you, brings out the best in you, and is faithful in your highest highs and lowest lows, give it up for Iris and Arthur, everybody.
I will give it up for Iris and Arthur. Arthur is great. I just want to hang out with him some more.
Oh, Arthur is the MVP. Hands down.
Yes. All right, well, let's dive right in and share our high-level thoughts about The Holiday. So this movie came out in 2006. It is now many decades later. Well, nearly 2 decades later. So we're going to keep this front section short. If you haven't watched The Holiday, we will not spoil this movie in this first section. And I feel like it's fitting to start with, Michael, you mentioned this is one of your favorite movies of all time. And honestly, before we were hitting record and we were planning our content calendar, I'm just so excited to hear you talk about why this movie is your favorite, because that absolutely tickles me. So do you want to start off with maybe when you first watched this movie, what made you fall in love with it, and how this movie was for you on this time around? I don't know how many times you watched this movie, maybe a ton, since it's your favorite.
Yeah, so I unfortunately didn't get to watch this film in the theater in 2006. For some reason, I completely missed it then. But when I did see it for the first time, it was in June of 2007. And I told this story on my Rescreen episode on this. I was living in Seattle at the time. I was working across the street from the University of Washington. And down the street was a Blockbuster. And I would regularly frequent that Blockbuster to rent movies, video games, stuff like that. And so one day in June of 2007, I was in there and I saw the case of the DVD for The Holiday. And for some reason, I was like, you know what? I'm going to check that out. And so I rented it, immediately fell in love with the film. Ended up going to Suncoast, when Suncoast was still a thing, and went and bought the DVD there and continually watched it and have watched it many, many times since then. Really what drew me into this film was the characters and the story. I really just fell in love with these characters, particularly Iris and Miles and Arthur. Like that, to me, that whole story, and we'll get into deeper as to why that is, but I really resonated with those characters. I really sympathized and empathized with them, and really felt like that was kind of really a part of, what I was thinking, what I was feeling, and really just was drawn into them. And so that's really what drew me into the film, made me fall in love with it. And every single time I've watched the film, I still fall in love with that characters, with their stories. And it just really warms my heart every time I get to watch this film. Even in this latest rewatch that I did, same thing. It was just these characters and this story just really is like a nice warm blanket that you just kind of wrap yourself in. And especially during the holidays when it gets cold, it's nice to have that nice warm blanket to wrap yourself in and really enjoy it.
Oh my gosh. Describing this movie as a cozy, warm blanket is like the most perfect way to describe it. I love it. I'm sure we'll dive into lots more of some of the details and some of the scenes and moments that really made you fall in love with some of these characters and the stories that we get to see unfold on screen. Sarah, I'm curious your thoughts about The Holiday, and had you seen it before? Because this is on paper not a Sarah movie, but did you see it before? What were your thoughts about this watch?
Yes, I have seen it before. This was a movie that my friends would want to watch during my teen years. And so sometimes we would watch The Holiday, and they didn't always appreciate my commentary. And some friends learned that maybe inviting Sarah to watch a rom-com is not your best yes. But I think for me, like, The Holiday is not a Sarah movie. I'm not into rom-coms. I'm also not like the biggest like holiday movie person. Like if I'm going to watch a Christmas movie, I want to watch Die Hard. But as far as like rom-coms go, I think this is one of the better ones, largely because of the Iris, Miles, Arthur storyline. And I just wanted to keep spending time with them. I love Arthur. Anytime he was on screen, I was like, yes, my guy, let's go. And there's so much character growth between all three of them that I really appreciate. And you can really sink your teeth into those characters. And there's so much richness there. So I do think that there's a lot more in this one to enjoy. It was interesting watching this, though, now as an adult, because I probably haven't seen this in, I don't know, 15 years, maybe? Like, it's been a while since the last time I watched this. So it's just kind of fascinating revisiting this as an adult, having lived a little bit more life and seeing how much more I appreciated Iris and Miles and them. And I don't think I had as great of an appreciation when I was younger. So that was just, I really loved spending time with Iris and Arthur, as we've already mentioned.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised at how much that the three of them and their whole story arc in this film like aged really well and still like hit all the feels in all the right ways. I grew up watching a lot of the like late 90s, 2000s rom-coms, just like the height of the rom-com era. They were just churning those out, and it was like the thing to do with your friends. So I watched so many of them, and it's so funny revisiting some of them now because some of them really either haven't aged well, or you're just like, I thought this was so deep back then, and it is not that deep now. And so I was kind of like wondering if The Holiday would be like that as well. And I think I feel some of that with Cameron Diaz and Jude Law's whole storyline, which I wouldn't have picked up on as a younger human. But man, the Iris, Miles, Arthur storyline really just, it works so well now. And the way that they bring out, like I mentioned in my once in a summary, the best in each other, encourage each other. They are like able to love each other in a way that you just like rarely get to see in a lot of romantic comedy movies. And so that was really surprisingly refreshing for me. So on the whole, I'm like, man, there's this whole half of a film that is absolutely amazing. And then we can talk about some of the Cameron Diaz, Jude Law stuff too, because I think it's an interesting like contrast and foil to the other storyline. But yeah, on the whole, I think I was so pleasantly surprised at how much this movie worked for me. I didn't expect that. I thought I would have some more qualms with it being a full-grown adult watching this now, and it got me in my feels, man, by the end, and I was kind of surprised by that. Okay, well, let's give a spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen The Holiday yet, it's been nearly 2 decades. So we're just going to dive right in now and have full free reign to talk about any of the plot points and storylines of this movie. So, Michael, I'm curious to hear, because you've seen this movie so many times, in this latest rewatch, were there things that really stood out to you or like resonated extra well that maybe is different than some of your previous watches? Because I think that's always fun and interesting to see in a movie that you've seen so many times, the different parts that stick out to you with each time. So I'm curious for you this time, what really hit all the right spots for you?
Well, I think one thing that really stood out to me in this latest rewatch that I don't know if I never really thought about it or hadn't really noticed, and it was just kind of a minor thing, but it's how much Ethan, Amanda's boyfriend, who at the beginning of the film, cheats on her with the receptionist and basically gets thrown out, how impactful that he is in this short amount of time that he's on screen. Because Edward Burns, who plays him, at that time, he was a pretty well-known actor. He'd been in several other things, directed a couple things. And so he was kind of a, pretty popular actor / director. But he's in the film just a brief amount of time. But the amount of time that he's there, he's so impactful. And which you kind of need to kickstart Amanda to go on the journey that she goes on, which, leads to the whole interaction with going with Iris as far as like switching houses. But the fact that Ethan is just barely there, but yet, he leaves such an impact. I thought that was very interesting, juxtaposed to Jasper, who is the absolute worst. He's the worst character in the history of rom-coms, I think. But he's there pretty much the entire film. And, we see his impact continually throughout the film. But the fact that Ethan is just barely there, and yet he, his words leave such a impact on Amanda that, it's the impetus to get her to do the house exchange with Iris, which sets up, basically the plot of the story.
And then the other part with Ethan that I really stood out to me is he is the connection to Miles too. So like he plays a really pivotal role in both of their stories, even though he's on screen for a very, very short period of time.
Yes, that's right. Those like chance encounters, that web of relationships that usher in the love that you might be running from that's going to find you is really fun to see those like serendipitous moments that happen in this like interconnection of network of relationships that exist. That's really interesting. It's also fascinating to see the way the film like kind of calls back to some of the words that Ethan's spoken to Amanda that like really are the cause of a lot of her insecurities. I thought that was really quite accurate, kind of the power of words, like you were saying, Michael. And she shares pretty vulnerably some of those like insecurities that she has when she meets Jude Law's character Graham. And so you get it, his impact is still present even if he's not on screen, because you see her really having to like reckon with some of the things that she's been told about who she is, when in reality she's someone different. And it's just like the words of this man that are kind of haunting her in some ways. And I think that's pretty true to life of like us as human beings. Like things people say kind of just like stick with us in our minds, and it takes us new experiences to be able to rewrite those stories for us.
Yeah, and especially the one scene early on when Ethan is, about to get thrown out. He, says all these things of like, basically trying to, justify the affair that he has with his receptionist, and kind of making it out that it's Amanda's fault when in reality it's all his fault. But the one scene that I always go back to with those two is he's standing outside, she's up on the balcony, and he's, I guess trying to defend himself. he at one point the camera cuts over to the groundskeeper, and the groundskeeper is looking at Ethan, and he's like, "Don't you say it, don't you say it." And Ethan then goes on to say, like, you know, what kind of girlfriend doesn't shed a tear when, you know, they're breaking up with their boyfriend or whatever, and, you know, basically, you know, sticks his foot in his mouth, and the groundskeeper just looks at him and he just lowers his head and shakes it and is like, he's like, "I tried to warn you, dude, but you went ahead and said it." So that one was always a scene that, like, early on, I always got a kick out of, because it's like, man, Ethan just could not ever get it into his head, you know, that he had everything right in front of him, and he basically just threw it all away because of an affair that he had with a young receptionist that he then tried to justify in front of his girlfriend. It was just, yeah, I mean, you know, we'll get into about how Jasper is the worst, but Ethan is pretty terrible in his own right.
The moment that I really loved in that interaction between Amanda and Ethan was when she's kicking him out. She says, "I will send you your things." And that's such a boss move of like, I'm not going to throw your stuff out. You don't have to stay here and collect them. I am self-sufficient enough, and you are so like beneath me because you treated me so badly that I'm just going to send you your things. Just go away. Like, I loved how she did that. And I loved the inclusion of that line because it's so dismissive of him after he has done this, you know, betrayed her in this way and then tries to gaslight her about it. I loved that.
She's such a badass. It's great. And it's neat to see that we get a little taste of, like, she's great at her craft too, you know? She's this highly successful female owner of a company that she's running. It's great. And I think that's one of the interesting things of the way that Ethan gaslights her is he says something along the lines of like, "Well, you're always working. And so like I was kind of unfulfilled and unsatisfied," and him trying to justify his actions based on that. And I'm like, wow, that concept of like a strong, ambitious woman and kind of it being at odds with her spouse or her partner feeling threatened by that, I think was like such a like prominent theme, especially in those like 2000s movies. And it's neat to see that I think we've like made some progress in this realm of like celebrating women that are ambitious and working and going after their dreams. But to kind of seeing how that was portrayed in this movie was really fascinating and such a like reflection of the times, I think.
And then you see that come up again later in her conversation with Graham too, where she's almost like hesitant to admit it and talk about work. And you can tell that there's been that almost shame put on her because she is this successful woman in business and she knows what she's doing. So it was interesting to see her growth and to have that opportunity for her to actually like bring that part of herself to the table rather than feeling like she needed to just like tuck it away in the corner.
You know, speaking of the company, like I really thought that it was cool that she had that movie trailer company that she has, and we get to see a little bit of the work that she did, and we get introduced to two characters that I wish we could had more of them in the film, but you know, we weren't allowed to it just because of, you know, time and everything. But Ben and Bristol, who's played by young John Krasinski and Katherine Hahn, those two characters I really liked because, you know, we see the friendship that they have with Amanda and how they work together, and they're cutting the trailer for this new movie, Deception, with James Franco and Lindsay Lohan, and the way that they, you know, interact and talk with each other in that scene, I really enjoyed it. And it makes me wish that we had Deception as a actual movie, because it just, the way that Amanda gets the trailer together, it makes you want to see that movie. And so I thought that that's a little cool thing of that. Yeah, we see, you know, Amanda's love life is not where it should be at, you know, at this point of the film early on, but her work life is, you know, it's having a benefit because we get to see this really cool trailer that she works on, and it makes you want to see that film.
One of my favorite parts about that scene is when she's giving notes and feedback and she says to change the text to red for like coming out on Christmas Day. And she says, a happy red, not a Scorsese red. And I was like, oh my gosh, I now understand the depths of what that means. And the first time I watched this, that would have been a total throwaway line that I would not have understood. So that was a fun little like, look at her. She's got film chops. And that was really fun to see. Tickled my brain. But yeah, the other thing that I think is cool about her job that the film kind of has fun with over the course of the movie is her kind of inner thoughts, inner life, where she hears the voiceover of her own life as if it were a trailer. And we've all been there where like work kind of takes over our brain and it bleeds into all the other aspects of our lives. But I thought the film had such a fun time playing with that concept. And it oddly works really well because Arthur says to Iris that she is the leading lady of her movie, of her life. And so this concept of Amanda being the leading lady of her story and this fake imaginary trailer voice kind of articulating the things that are happening in her life at the time was like a really fun just like device in the movie that we get to see revisited again and again, but also kind of fitting for the overall like deeper meanings and themes of kind of being really exhibiting main character energy, as the trendy term that we use today is.
Yeah, that was one thing whenever, I watch this film, I go back to thinking of movie trailer voice guy who was synonymous in the 90s and 2000s, and it's just iconic voice that you hear in all the trailers back then, and the fact that they got him to do the voiceover for Amanda's life was just very fun and entertaining. But it's interesting to juxtapose that with Iris, who is the narrator at the beginning of the film, and how she introduces and talks about love and how there's different types of love and like she's the narrator of like her story, because it's like she, is in Surrey, she lives a simple life and everything. Whereas Amanda lives in LA, she owns her business. She has a really nice house, and, she has kind of that movie trailer voiceover guy in her head as the narrator. And so it's nice to compare those two as to how, and like you said too, Jen, with how Amanda views herself as opposed to where Iris views herself is really kind of the comparison that you go into. And again, it reminds me of how much I love Iris's character and the journey that she goes on, because for me, that one is a lot more relatable than Amanda's is. And so that's why I always seem to go back to Iris and how she goes on her journey. I resonate and relate to her more so. And so that's why that's always the one that I go back to.
Yeah, I think we're all like seemingly really connected with that storyline. So I'm curious if we want to kind of share which aspects of the trio of their storyline like really was captivating or tugged on your heartstrings a little bit. Curious for both of you. Michael, do you want to share?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so much to get into with the three of them, because they all resonate in the same manner, but they all come at it from like different perspectives. Because we have Iris, who is dealing with the unrequited love of Jasper, who basically leads her on for 3 years in, on again, off again, kind of playing her when he wants things done because he knows that she'll do it for him. There's that aspect of it. And then you have the Miles aspect of it where, he feels like that he has this relationship that, most people would think would be unattainable, with being with Maggie, this young actress who, is on the come up, and, he thinks that, he's successful in the work that he does as in music, in arranging scores for films, but he feels like that he's not good enough, or that, he doesn't think that, he somehow is well enough to keep a girl like Maggie, but yet he tries to live up to that. And then you have Arthur, who has gone through, you know, a successful career in screenwriting. He had the love of his life and lost her, in death. And, he's kind of living out his remaining years just by himself. And it's like all these three kind of need that connection in some way, shape, or form. But it's not until they kind of come together in happy happenstance that, we see them all kind of merge together on that same lane of growth that we get to the end of the film, where they all have kind of grown and matured in their own ways, but also together.
And I think that community aspect is one of my favorite parts of their story. I have many issues with rom-coms, but one of them that I feel is kind of like a trope is that in a rom-com, sometimes it comes across as like, if I just find love, then everything's going to be solved. And it's just me and this person, and that's it, and that's all I need. And I'm like, that's not actually how things work. And life is really hard, and you need like support systems and things. And there's just a lot that you have to do in life. And so I love that in this movie, you see Iris, Miles, and Arthur, they're all working through different things, but they're all helping each other grow. And there's this really, really beautiful camaraderie that you see between them, that they are able to support one another and challenge each other to grow and push each other to, go after whatever the thing is that they're needing. And so I love the emphasis on that in this movie, because I feel like you don't always get something like that in a rom-com. So that's just another reason why this little trio is just so special. And I just love Arthur. He's great. He is just a grumpy old man, but also he just loves movies and clearly is just talking about them all day long, which is some of our favorite things to do. So I just wanted to keep hanging out with Arthur and just pick his brain about all of the classics.
Yeah, it's crazy that Eli Wallach, who plays Arthur, is such a renowned actor. He was in The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, Godfather, all these, iconic films. But there's a whole generation of people that know him as Arthur because of his performance and how great he is. And he's not, the great thing about him is that he's not a cynical character. Like he's somebody that he could, just as easily be, shut off and angry about it and everything, but he's not. Like he's shut off, and that he's kind of, he lives alone, and that really, for the most part, he has the occupational nurse that comes by once in a while. But he does have his small circle of friends that we meet at the Hanukkah party. He has his group, and that he doesn't necessarily hate the world and what it's become or anything like that. But that, he almost feels like, I lived my life. The love of my life is gone. I'm just kind of riding out the rest of my time. But it's Iris who kind of, reminds him that there's still life to be led. And that there's things still to celebrate, because, he kind of puts off the whole awards recognition from the Writers Guild, as, they don't really want to celebrate me. There won't be people that show up, but like Iris is, gets him out of his shell to be able to, recognize that there's still life to be led. And that, I think that's one of the cool things about that whole story arc, is that because Iris is able to get Arthur out of his shell, Arthur is then able to get Iris out of her shell. Because that's always the thing that, and we mentioned it earlier, the great line of Arthur telling her, like, you're supposed to be a leading lady and you're acting like the best friend. And it's like, I love that scene when they're in the restaurant and she's sitting there and she's weeping and crying. And she says, it's been 3 years I've been in therapy, and no therapist has been able to say it as well as you said it. And then she says, it's beautiful, brutal, but beautiful. And like that's the great thing about this connection that they have. And obviously, like the rom-com, a lot of the rom-com is kind of centered on Amanda and Graham. But I think really what makes this film great is that relationship between Arthur and Iris, and then the spark and the love affair that comes between Iris and Miles, that Arthur is there to help foster as well. So it's really great that, if you want the rom-com, like the straight up rom-com, you've got that with Amanda and Graham. But if you want like real depth and growth and honesty and all the really deep feelings and friendships and everything like that, you got that with the triumvirate of Iris, Miles, and Arthur.
And it's so interesting that the movie feels so intentional in creating the foils of the two relationships. I mean, like obviously there's four protagonists, 5 arguably, and then like 2 pairs of couples that end up at the end. But their journeys, their pace, all of that is so vastly different that it's almost like the movie's inviting us in and being like, okay, you've seen this traditional rom-com a bajillion times before, but it's actually the other one that pulls on your heartstrings more, which is kind of this fun examination of like what really does move us. Because you're so right, like Iris and Miles are building on top of a foundation of such friendship and appreciation for each other without the other dimension of the romance thrown in quite yet. Like for pretty much the whole movie, they're just good friends with maybe a little spark, but none of them is really making it clear. It's really vague. They both have other relationships that they're thinking about, talking with each other about. And their first date is literally the like last 5 minutes of the movie. And that's just so different from the traditional rom-com structure, which is we get our 2 protagonists that immediately like form this super fiery spark that then we see they struggle and then they finally triumph at the end. But this movie for Iris and Miles almost takes them through a much slower, steady, deep form of connection and then adds the romance at the very, very end, which is so different from Graham and Amanda, who immediately like romance is from the beginning. It's like their first meeting and they're already in that romantic stage together. And so the foil of their pace and the journey that those 2 relationships go on is, I think, really fascinating. And I think it's telling too to see like which of those tug on our heartstrings. I mean, I think it's easy to be like smitten by Jude Law's character. He's just, like the classic male lead in a romantic movie. And it's neat that Jack Black is like kind of the unconventional option, but arguably like there's so much more depth and connection that like as a viewer I feel to him more so than Jude Law, who's like beautiful face, very handsome man, very charming, but at the end you're like, man, but Miles though. And the other aspect of their relationships that I really love about Miles and Iris is that you see them connect over like real meat. They have conversations about movies. They get to talk about music together. Miles gets to show her his craft, and they are kind of forming these connections around other subjects within their environment and their worlds instead of just focused on each other, which I thought was also an interesting dimension too.
Yeah, one thing too, mentioning stuff that I just noticed for the first time on this latest rewatch, there were 2 things. One was, well, they both are around the same scene at the Hanukkah party, is when they're all sitting together and they're all talking, and Miles is asked where his girlfriend Maggie is, and he says, she's shooting a film in New Mexico, blah, blah, blah. And we see the shot where it's looking at Arthur, and Arthur cuts his eyes over at Iris and then cuts it back to Miles and says it's her loss. So I never noticed that look before, or I just didn't pay attention to it. But it was just an interesting look at how almost at that point Arthur is like, oh, I see something here between Iris and Miles. And I just thought that was really fun and cute. And the other thing was, and it was just something that I don't know if I just never really thought about it or put it together. But earlier, when Miles comes by the first time with Maggie in the car, he's there to pick up Ethan's laptop because, obviously, you mentioned about how Amanda was going to, send all of Ethan's things back to him. Well, at some point, she was supposed to send the laptop, which had the music and everything like that on there. And Miles was there to come pick it up. And obviously Iris had just gotten there to the house in LA. So she didn't know all about this. And she says that, you can come back later and pick it up. Well, that's the reason why Miles goes to the house and stays at the Hanukkah party and everything, was to pick up the laptop. And then when you see him walking out at the end, he has, the brisket in one hand and the laptop in the other. And I just, for some reason on this watch, I noticed the fact that he had the laptop in his hand, and that was the reason why he came. But, again, it's those little things that, you may watch a film hundreds of times, but, there's things that you just pick up on the 101 watch. That's like, oh yeah, that's right. And it ties back in earlier and just all kind of plays into the story and the progression of the story.
I definitely did not notice the laptop at all. I remember thinking, like, why is this dude here? He's just like coming to bring her FedEx package to the door. But I'm like, all right, let's go. Love stories are developing. We've got to push them forward somehow. But it's neat to see, the show's, the movie's intentionality to be able to weave those details together.
Or maybe he's just moonlighting as a FedEx driver. Like that's his side gig. It's really expensive in LA. He's just doing his side hustle here late at night, crashing a Hanukkah party.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, speaking of the FedEx thing, that was always something like especially if you look at it now in modern, today with what gets sent, it's the manuscript of Jasper to Iris. And like, even in 2006, you can add attachments on emails of documents to,
right?
To do that. And so it's like, especially now you look at it, it's like, wait a minute, why did he send her a FedEx of the manuscript? Why couldn't he have just emailed her? Again, and that's the whole thing of like boundaries and everything that Jasper has absolute no idea of, dealing with, because, whenever she left, she sent, because he sent the email to her on her BlackBerry, which again, dates this film. But, he emails her in the BlackBerry and was like, you're going on vacation to Lotus Land, which again, who calls LA Lotus Land? Like, that was another thing that stood out on this latest rewatch was the nickname of Lotus Land. But anyway, she, he sends her this, and then she basically tells him, I need to get away. Don't contact me. But yet he still constantly contacts her and is like, I really need you, Iris. And if you could, do this manuscript and edit it for me. But yeah, he sends it FedEx. Like, why in the world would you send a document in FedEx in 2006? Like, you could send it by email. Like, I'm pretty sure the attachment can get there and everything like that. But yeah, that was always a weird little blip in I guess they needed the product placement, I guess, with FedEx. But yeah, that's just something that was kind of weird.
Yeah, I definitely saw that as like another way to try and control Iris. Going on the theme of Jasper is the worst. Sending her an attachment of an email is one thing, but FedExing her this manuscript, the physical pages, it's just another example of like imposition almost for him. Like, I did all of this. I printed these out. I sent this way. So you have to look at this. This is of this much importance to me. And so it must be important to you. So I just saw it as another kind of twisted way to like manipulate her into doing what he wanted her to do, which the whole movie, he is just gaslighting her, breaking through boundaries. Like, he sucks. He is such a hateable character. And so just props to how that character is written, because like immediately you just despise him and he has no growth and he continues to be the absolute worst from start to finish.
By the way, I love the actor himself, Rufus Sewell.
Yeah.
Like, he is a phenomenal actor. I know that he plays the villain so well. I almost feel like sometimes he gets typecast as a villain because he plays it so well. I'm reminded of another film that he's in, The Illusionist. He's phenomenal in that film, and he's the villain there as well. And so he plays that so well, but he's a really good dude. And it's just unfortunate sometimes that, sometimes the really good dudes always kind of seem to get typecast as villains. I think Mark Strong is another actor like that. Like, he's just a phenomenal dude, but he always gets cast as a villain. But yeah, Jasper, I almost just think he is like the antithesis of like what a good guy is supposed to be. And you mentioned it, Sarah, the amount of gaslighting he does, and not just to himself. I mean, not just to Iris, but to his own fiance as well. Like, the fact that, he gets engaged to her, but is still, talking to Iris on the side, doing all these different things, makes a phone call to Iris while he's on a date with his fiance, ends up getting on a plane and going all the way from England to LA to, try and woo Iris again. It shows the depths of which Jasper is willing to go to get what he wants. Because in the end, it's really all about Jasper. Like, what he wants, what he needs, that's the most important thing. And it doesn't matter if it hurts Iris. It doesn't matter if it hurts his fiance. It doesn't matter, because in his mind, he is the most important character that's going on. And I really appreciate the fact that Iris, even at her lowest point, and when we see Iris at her lowest point, that's when Jasper comes in and, does the in-person thing. That's when she finally has enough and she gets the gumption to stand up to Jasper and to give him that what for that he had been deserving and getting it throughout the course of the film. But it takes that point for her to get there. And then when she does, it's like you're hooting and hollering, you're cheering, you're celebrating that fact, because you get to see that moment where Iris really takes control of the situation and really becomes the leading lady in her life.
Man, I love this highly satisfying Jasper rant. It's great because he is the worst, but he also is so effective at doing the like push-pull of reeling you back in right when he knows that he's feeling like he's losing you. And so I thought the movie did a great job of showcasing the way that he's almost not always communicating clearly with her, but enough to give her a little bit of that hope or that feeling of her being special that gets to like reel her all the way back in. And it's really neat to see the way that by the time that she has that moment of realization about, how he's treated her all these years, you can't help but think about how this whole journey that she's been on, really of like self-discovery and like believing in her own sense of worth and identity, that has been so pivotal for her like big realization by the end of the movie. And so her cutting off and cutting out Jasper is almost like it's not the main event. It's almost a byproduct of this self-love and growth and discovery that she's experienced, that she can finally do this with such conviction. And so her whole monologue that she gives around like, I think she gives this is a conversation with her and Miles later on, but she has this comment around like sometimes just getting away, meeting new people, and then discovering all these little pieces of yourself and feeling worthwhile again is all you need. And I feel like that plays such a big role in her courage and willingness to finally realize and see that she deserves more. But at the beginning of the film, that sense of identity and worth is so much lower. That's only through meeting these people and discovering herself that she can finally snip him out of her life. And you're right. It is so satisfying.
I really love the scene with Miles and Iris right after Miles finds out that Maggie's cheating on him, and they're back at the house, and Miles is just, he's heartbroken. He's just distraught, and Iris, you know, at first gives him tea, but he's like, "No, do you have anything stronger?" He ends up giving an alcoholic beverage, and Iris is saying, at one point she stands up and she says, sometimes you hear the phrase, I understand what you're going through, and it doesn't really make sense, but I really understand what you're going through, and then goes on to explain kind of the situation with Jasper. And then Miles is the one that in that moment, not only does he understand a little bit more of Iris's story, but he knows kind of what he needs to do in helping out Iris. And so I love that scene. And I feel like that's kind of that moment, that spark that, ultimately leads to, their relationship. But it's just cool how even in that moment where they're just friends, but they're both commiserating in these moments where they're heartbroken, but yet they come together and, are looking out for one another. And so I really love that scene because it's, and also too, she was going to offer to cook him Christmas fettuccine. And then he turns around and says, "No, let me cook you fettuccine." And then the very next scene, we see Amanda actually eating fettuccine when she's watching the TV. And so I just love that little scene between them.
Yeah, is Christmas fettuccine a thing? Like,
it is now.
It is now, apparently. Thank you, the holiday. I mean, I'm always down for more carbs, so that sounds good to me.
Well, what's so interesting is on TikTok, there's a lot of posts that people will create where they host parties around like Nancy Meyers themed movies, and there's a lot of like foods that are often iconic, and the Christmas fettuccine is one of them. But I've seen so many of those videos at this point, and then to like actually watch the source material to see where it's come from was really funny. But one of the things that I guess didn't appreciate fully the first time I watched this / didn't know this detail was that Hans Zimmer composed the score. I did not know this. Was this common knowledge? Because I was not aware.
Oh, yeah, I knew it. And funny thing too is that as the one point in the blockbuster scene when Miles is holding up one of the films, and it's an Hans Zimmer film, and so it's just a little funny little thing that he, his to Hans Zimmer score, and that Hans Zimmer actually doing the score of this film.
Yeah, I feel like the score really makes this film feel like such a vibe. It's really giving cozy, fuzzy blanket energy, to your point, Michael, from the beginning of the episode. It's so atmospheric, and I think really adds to a lot of the like magic and feeling of like place and mood. And so the kind of aesthetic or vibes of this movie, I think, is just interesting to see the way that like people have taken it and run with it. And there's whole TikTok videos about like making your home feel like the holiday or feel like a Nancy Meyers movie. And the score and kind of the visuals, I think, really add a lot to that. The like this being kind of a mood piece,
Yeah, and not just the score. I mean, Hans Zimmer's score is like one of the best parts of the film, but the soundtrack too. One of my favorite scenes, and I go so much about Iris and that whole story, but probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire film is Amanda at Iris's cottage, and she's blaring the Killers' Mr. Brightside, and she's singing it out and everything. And I love that song to begin with, but that's just one of my favorite scenes because she is just like, she has that energy of just like belting out that song, and just not just that song, but the "Are You Gonna Be My Girl" that's played whenever Iris is coming into the house for the first time in LA, and even "Let Go," the song that's playing whenever Amanda is shown in the pub when Graham goes in because, he had invited her to come to the pub for dinner with his friends. And, he's looking around trying to figure out if she did show up. And then we have the reveal that she is there. And that song there too is just Nancy Meyers picked, I think, not just a great score in having Hans Zimmer score it, but the soundtrack too, because the music plays so very well with what we see visually on screen.
And I think obviously it's important because music is so important in a film to help create the atmosphere and heighten the emotions and all of the things. But I love those extra details because Miles composes music for films. And so you have this character who his whole life is music and understands how music affects how we feel and helps us interpret the things that we're seeing on screen. And so it just makes sense on that other level too, that the music would just have to be like so top notch because we have a character whose whole life is this part of filmmaking.
And one of my favorite scenes is when Miles and Iris are in his kind of music studio and he's sharing Arthur's theme that he's composed with Iris for the first time. And she has this like look of excitement of like, oh my gosh, it sounds just like him. And then he reveals that he wrote one for her. And I thought that was just such a sweet like way that he's expressing his affection for her in his way that is so him. And it's also such a signal of him showcasing that he understands her deeply and sees her fully and is able to capture kind of the essence of how she shows up in the world and how her mind and her kind of demeanor feels to him. And so I mean, as far as like romantic movie gestures, that's high up there. I think that was so cool. And he's getting to use his unique skill sets to be able to communicate with her in this like other medium. Like we've seen these like big professions of love that we often see in romantic movies. But I'm like, man, Miles has got one of the most romantic gestures I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, I love that scene too, especially at the beginning of it where, he explains to her, I'm composing this score for Arthur, and then he immediately starts and it's the Indiana Jones theme, and she recognizes it immediately, and she's like, wait a minute, that's not it. And then he goes, oh, that's right, that's Indiana Jones, and then like does another one and then does the Arthur theme and then does her theme, and then as the scene ends, it's just like this playful banter where he's like, doodly doo doo doo, and then she goes and scroodly doo, and then he goes, oh, you're scroodly doo, oh, that's good, and it's like you're a doodle phenom, and it just I love that scene so much because it showed Kate Winslet in a funny, playful banter way that I don't know a lot of times, especially up to that point, that she had gotten to express very much. And so I just loved that scene because of the fact that it got to show her, really expressing that kind of fun, playful banter emotion. But like you said, Jen, it was a way of expressing that love and connection that was starting to really form. Because we noticed earlier in the film, whenever Miles shows up, the first time and Maggie is there, that, she's on the phone and, he's playing a score and, she's not really wanting to listen to it. She's wanting to talk on the phone. So it's like she doesn't really appreciate Miles's work and what he does and the job that he does. But the fact that Iris is, interested in what Miles does and really, appreciates it. I think that it shows that difference there in how, Iris has a lot more in common there with what Miles does and enjoys than what Maggie felt and thought about what Miles did.
And I love that we get to see throughout so many little moments in the movie the like charm of Miles. You know, he's so quirky and he's got his very specific sense of humor. And we get all of these little moments. It's never too much, too. I think sometimes with a character like him, especially as like a male lead in a romantic movie, they like overdo it of like, he's so funny and he's so charming. And it's a lot more subtle and understated. And he's always himself in every scene and joking around and really lighthearted, but also they give him plenty of those earnest moments as well. So there's like a very full picture of him instead of turning him into a character of that like really silly, very charismatic male lead. I think that he's a lot more complex in that. And I like that the film kind of plays within all of those balances of his character as well.
It's a nice juxtaposition with Miles and Graham, given how Miles is kind of mild-mannered. He has his job and, he has kind of his quirks, but, he's not the typical rom-com guy. Whereas with Graham, even though, he is very down to earth in his own way, working in publishing and being a single dad and everything, but that he kind of is that typical rom-com because, he's good looking. He, has that Jude Law flair, but there is that kind of juxtaposition that Miles is kind of not what you would expect a rom-com, but it makes sense because of Jack Black and how he plays it. And Jude Law, when he plays Graham, it makes sense because, that role is for him.
And I love that we get to see Jack Black as a romantic, lead. He is a love interest in this film and not just, a silly side character or, the quirky sidekick, but he is lovable and desirable in his own way. And I appreciate that this rom-com is showing that, there are these good guys who are different out there, and you maybe don't be looking for a Jude Law character. Maybe looking for a Jack Black character, because he might write you a song and might make you Christmas fettuccine, which is pretty great. So I love that, especially in 2006. I feel like that was such a strong time for rom-coms, and to see Jack Black cast as a romantic lead is just, it's so different than what was coming out at the time. So good job, The Holiday, for choosing Jack Black, because he nails it. He's great.
Yeah, this was very much against type for him, especially in 2006, because you're right, Sarah, he was very much kind of the wacky, zany, goofy sidekick in a lot of the films leading up to it. And the fact that he was able to portray this role, which used his musical talents that he has, but also give a different perspective of, who he could play and everything. And for the longest time, this was my favorite Jack Black role. Probably now I would put, the voice of Bowser in Super Mario Brothers movie as kind of number 2 now at this point. But this one always to me is my favorite because, it's not the typical Jack Black character or Jack Black role, but that it's really earnest and honest and really has a happy quality and a loving quality to it that's different than a lot of the roles that he was playing up to that point and was kind of known for.
Yeah, very true. And he still has that side of him, like him goofing off in the DVD store, but it's balanced out so well with this really sweet, kind of softer, earnest side of him that's really tender and is highly empathetic and expressive, that I think is really fun and really sweet too. And it is the perfect foil for Jude Law, who is like kind of that confident, suave, classic male lead. There's a moment in Jude Law when he puts on his glasses where I was like, oh, this movie knows what it's doing. Jude Law and glasses. It knows it's going to get the female audience with that one. So it's interesting to see the way that the movie plays into kind of their archetypes and really kind of teases that out a lot for us as the viewers too. Okay, any other last big thoughts about The Holiday before we wrap?
I have to mention like two things.
Okay.
One is my love for cinema that came out of this film, a classic cinema. I remember when I watched the film for the first time and all the different classic films that Arthur brings up and mentions, some of the different actresses and everything like that. And mentioned, I talked about how there was a Blockbuster and I would frequent that on a regular basis. As soon as this film, I'd watched it, I went and checked out like some of the classic films. So like the Lady Eve that got mentioned, I immediately rented it after watching this film and really enjoyed that. And there were, just like Iris had gotten that list of films from Arthur to watch, I made sure to do that as well. And it really got me to appreciate and enjoy those classic films a lot more. And, it's not necessarily, the expected byproduct that you would get for a rom-com is to, go watch a lot of old classic films. But this one did. And I always will appreciate that for it. And the other thing, and you kind of mentioned it already, Jen, about the Blockbuster scene in the film. That's one of my favorite scenes too. Not only the fact that Jack Black and Miles is being silly and goofy with holding up the DVDs and singing along the theme songs or whatever, but the cameo that's there and the story behind it is one of my favorite little story moments in film. And the story is, if you've never heard it, is Dustin Hoffman lived down the street from that Blockbuster. And one night he's going by there because he's wanting to check out a film. And he sees that they're filming inside the store. And he goes up to Nancy Meyers, the director, and asks what's going on. And she asks, hey, do you want to have a cameo in the film? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so that's when we get the scene where Jack Black is going through the different DVDs and he holds up The Graduate and mentions a tidbit about the score in that film. And we cut over and we see Dustin Hoffman looking at films, and he looks over and he goes, I can't go anywhere. And I just always love that little cameo, and I love the story behind it. And it's just fun little things like that just you find out in commentaries and things like that you just really appreciate. And by the way, if you've never listened to the commentary of The Holiday, it's worth checking out. I always say, like, any film that has an audio commentary, go and listen to it. But definitely, if you've not ever checked out the audio commentary for The Holiday, Nancy Meyers does it, and it's worth checking out if you get a chance.
It wouldn't be a Michael episode if we didn't get a really cool backstory on like the creation of the film, the backstory of how it all unfolded, or some really neat behind the scenes story. I didn't know that, actually, that story about Dustin Hoffman kind of walking by. I remember when that moment happened, I was like, this is such a random cameo, and like, why would they spend the money on this? You know what I mean? Just for like a fun little moment in there. So this makes so much more sense, and it's kind of a fun, whimsical chance encounter for this movie. It makes for a really fun moment for like an already really silly, fun scene. So that was pretty cool. All right. Well, this was our review and discussion of The Holiday. You can find it available to stream right now on Prime Video. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. And a big thank you to you, Michael, for joining and getting to share all of your thoughts about The Holiday and your love for this movie with us. Very cool. Very fascinating to see how much this movie has meant to you. Opened up the whole world of classic film for you, which is so cool. Little did the creators of The Holiday know that would be a fun byproduct for someone out there.
Yeah, I really appreciate being on, and I'm sure we could have went another hour or two talking about this film because there's so much to get into. But again, thanks for having me on. It's always a delight to talk with y'all. It's always fun. It's always engaging. It's always good conversation.
Love it. We love having you on. Where can people find more of you, your work, commentary on the interwebs, all things movies and Michael?
Yeah, so you can find me with the Screen Nerds Podcast. Wherever it is that you get your podcast, just search out Screen Nerds Podcast, and you can hopefully listen to classic episodes of rescreens. You can listen to new episodes of new films that are releasing with Crick Screen episodes. And you can find it, again, wherever you get your podcasts. And then as far as the socials go, on Twitter, it's at Screen Nerds Pod. And then on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, it's Screen Nerds Podcast. And you can interact with me on whatever social is your favorite.
Love it. We will include all of those links and handles, all those details in the show notes. Make sure to check out more of Michael and a lot of his commentary and just getting to follow along with his journey through movies. All right, well, our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today on this Christmas holiday season. Really a fun time of year. Hopefully everyone is relaxing and being able to rest and recharge. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review letting us know your thoughts about the holiday. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at moviesnestpod, or you can email us at moviesnestpod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss a very different kind of film, really closing out our little sandwich here that we have going on. We did the 1922 Nosferatu 2 weeks ago, and we're now taking a little break with the holiday, and we are going to be back next week to discuss the newest Nosferatu film by Robert Eggers. So we hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again with y'all very soon.